Hey physics. Okay, this is going to be a short video where I go over this slideshow that you were supposed to do this morning. And here we go. So this is about net force and inertia. Just kind of piecing together some of the stuff we've already kind of talked about. A force is a push or pull that one object exerts on another. So you can think about the hand pushing the brick or the foot pushing the gas pedal. Or you can think about air resistance, you can think about gravity, you can think about the spring force or tension force. So force is measured in newtons. 1 newton is the amount of force that it takes to cause 1 kilogram of mass to accelerate by 1 meter per second every second. So if you want to think about what that really means, if you take 1 kilogram of mass, it's how much force it would take to speed it up by 1 meter faster, like 1 meter a second faster every second. So that is actually quite a bit of force. That's like, when I was growing up, I kind of thought that newtons were like a pretty small amount, but they're really not. Like newtons are a hefty amount of force there. So multiple forces, and I just wanted to remind you that 1 kilogram is 2.2 pounds. So, you know, not too far off from a pound, but, okay, so multiple forces. There's usually multiple forces acting on an object at any given time. And you've seen this with the system schema, and you've also seen this with the free body diagrams. So if we were going to identify the forces acting on this dog, we could say that, yes, there's gravity there. His person pushes the car's gas pedal. So there is an applied force there, but not on the dog. So we could say no. If you're doing a system schema about it, then, you know, so this is going to be what's going to be in our dotted line when we do the system schema, basically. So there is an applied force in the system, but not on the dog. There is no tension on the dog unless the dog's got a leash on and the owner's like pulling on it. I'm going to say no because I would never do that to my dog when we're in the car. There is a normal force. That seat is holding the dog up, right? The car is holding the dog up. There is no friction for the dog, but there is air resistance, right? That wind pushing against him as he sticks his tongue out the window. So if I was going to draw a system schema, it would look something like this. Give me just a second and I will draw this out for you. Okay, so first thing I did here in my system schema is I made a circle for the dog and I put a dotted line around it. So it's important to remember, and when those of you that got points off on recognizing forces, it was usually one of the things was not knowing about this. So you start off with the object of focus, which in this case is the dog. What forces are on the dog? So I made a circle for that and a dotted line around it. So now I'll come back and do some more parts of. Okay, so here's the system schema that I came up with for this situation. The dog is our object of focus, so we have that one in the dotted line. And we said that there is a force of air resistance working on it, right? So that air resistance is between the dog and the air. We said that there is an applied force, but it's not acting on the dog, right? So that is between the car and the person that's driving the car. There is a normal force between the car and the dog. That support force that's holding it up. And there's a force of gravity between the dog and the earth. Now, one thing I didn't do yet that I'm going to real quick is I'm going to make that force of gravity shown as a dashed line because that's what you're supposed to do since it's a non-contact force, right? And I also can show that there is the force of gravity between the car and the earth, and I could also show it between the person and the earth. The dog is our focus, so we don't have to do too much beyond that, but it's good to kind of like be able to see all the forces that are going on there. Okay. So that was just a quick review of that one, and we'll get to the free body diagram review also. So the new part of this lesson is the net force. So net force is basically a way of adding or subtracting forces that are interacting with each other. So if we look at these carts right there, we can see that this cart has 60 newtons of force pushing it that way to the right, and it also has 30 newtons of force pushing it that way to the right. So that means that there's going to be a total of 90 newtons pushing it to the right. You just add them together. And then this one has 30 newtons of force pushing it to the right, but it has 10 newtons of force pushing it to the left. And so it ends up with a net force of 20 newtons. Basically, you subtract the smaller force from the bigger force to find out what that total force is there. Okay? So, simple addition, subtraction, just are they helping each other out, going in the same direction, or are they working against each other? And in that case, there'll be a minus. So, yeah, so again, this comes back to this idea of balanced forces. If the forces are balanced, that net force is going to be 0, meaning that the forces have canceled each other out. So that is the situation when things are not moving, or when they're moving at a consistent rate that's not changing. So light bulbs hanging by a wire have gravity working down in the same amount that the tension from the wire is holding them up. Books sitting on a table, force of gravity is the same amount as the normal force that's holding it up, and that's why it's not moving. But when we have unbalanced forces, that is what causes things to move or to change, to have a change in motion. So this cart may have this amount of friction acting on it, but it has this amount of applied force. So basically what's going to happen is that the actual amount of force that that cart is going to feel in a certain direction is going to be the applied force minus the amount of friction force, and we'll be measuring that in newtons. So then here's a situation where we have deceleration, which is actually something we're going to be studying in a couple days here. So we have these balanced forces of gravity and the normal force on this hockey puck. And it's moving forward at a consistent rate, but it doesn't have a force acting on it right now. What it has is just air resistance working against it, slowing it down. So if we're going to calculate the net force here, that first cart has a force of 90 newtons. And the 90 newtons to the right. The second cart has a net force of 20 newtons to the right, because there's 10 newtons working against those 30 newtons. So you get the net force of 20 newtons. So free body diagrams. So they're going to look like this. We've got 60 newtons this way, 30 newtons this way. So that means total of 90 newtons. And then here you can see it again there. It's basically just what this cart looks like right there. So this brings us back to Newton's first law of motion, which is about inertia, which just a super simple way of saying that is just that objects tend to resist a change in motion. And you can feel that in your body when you're sitting on the couch and you're thirsty and you need to get up, but you're like, I don't want to. That's inertia holding you still. And you can also feel it when you are super active and moving around, and all of a sudden it's time to stop or change direction, do something different, and you're like, I want to keep going, right? So we can feel inertia in our bodies. And the more mass something has, the more inertia it's going to have also. So you can think about that in terms of like a bird flying through the air can change directions pretty quickly, especially a small bird, just like shoot, shoot, shoot. Like no big deal because it's small and it doesn't have a whole lot to work against. Whereas a bus, because it is so much bigger, you can think about and feel like how long it takes for that bus to get started, and then how long it takes for the bus to turn, or how long it takes for the bus to slow down to a stop. None of those things happen instantly. It's a lot of inertia there's a lot of inertia to overcome there because the bus is so big. So the more mass an object has, the more inertia it has. So notice we're distinguishing between mass and weight here. They're not the same thing. Mass is just the amount of stuff that's there. So like, how big is the bus? And weight, sorry, my son's getting a phone call. Hopefully he gets it and it goes away soon. Whereas weight is directly impacted by how much gravity or how much force of gravity there is. So on Earth, I might weigh like 180 pounds, but on the moon, since the moon is a sixth the size of Earth, then I'm going to have a sixth of I still have the same amount of mass. I'm still the same person with the same amount of stuff in me. But if I'm on the moon, I'm going to weigh a sixth of that. So because there's a sixth the amount of gravity. So here's just basically what I just said. And if you want to check out some astronauts jumping around on the moon, you should know that their spacesuits, the total weight of their spacesuits plus their bodies is like 480 pounds. Like it's like 500 pounds. If they're a 200-pound person, their spacesuit's going to weigh like 280 pounds. And that's like modern day spacesuits. That's like not even like their spacesuits might have weighed more. And they're able to like bounce pretty high and kind of like skip around in this pretty like silly kind of way. So watch those videos real quick when you want to. And here's some real quick questions about mass versus weight and inertia. So which would have the most inertia? A bird flying, a bus stopping, or you turning on your bike? So it's going to be a bus stopping because the amount of inertia is always determined by how much mass something has. So where would you have the most weight? The sun, the moon, or the earth? You would weigh the most on the sun because the sun is a much larger object, so it would just kind of crush you. And where would you have the most mass? Well, the amount of mass that you have, the amount of stuff that makes you up is not going to change on different planets or whatever. So yeah, your mass is the same no matter where you are. Okay? So that's this one. I meant it to be short, but this is what we did.